Hi, this is Tim Yoder with Fit Small Business, and today I'm going to teach you about how to write a collection letter. And in fact, we're going to go over a series of 4 collection letters that I recommend you send your slow-paying customers. So let's get started. So the basics of your collection letters, first of all, these need to be formal business correspondence. So as such, they need to have all parties involved. Obviously, you need to have a return address on the letter, and you need to have your customer's address on the letter. So a collection letter is not a sticky note that you put on your customer's door, right? So we're talking about, with collection letters, formal business correspondence. So treat them as such. The objective of the letter needs to be very clearly stated, and this is true of all business correspondence. So in the last paragraph of the letter, you need to very clearly state what you want your customer to do. So please pay this amount by this date by sending a check to this address, or by logging in and paying by credit card, however you want them to pay. But make it crystal clear in that last paragraph what you expect the customer to do. Your collection letters need to be a series of letters, so it's not just one collection letter. Now, obviously, if they pay after the first one, that's fantastic. But as long as they continue to not pay, you need to send a series of 4 collection letters, and each one will get more serious, start to be better documentation for possible legal proceedings, etc. Each of the collection letters needs to reference the collection letter that was previously sent. So again, you're establishing that you've sent them a series of collection letters that you can refer to in any possible legal action. The language of the collection letters, now this is the hard part sometimes. You need to get a balance of professional language, but it also needs to be serious, right? I mean, you need them to pay you. So, but obviously, no personal attacks, no name calling, anything like that. So it needs to be very professionally written. If you've come across this video on YouTube, I've provided a link in the description to the article that goes with this video, and that article actually has 4 templates, one for each of these 4 collection letters. So those templates will give you a very good idea of what kind of professional language to use. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, so a few do's and don'ts of writing a collection letter. So obviously, keep it professional. Assume the customer will pay, and this is going to have a lot to do with the tone of the letter. So in your mind, when you're writing the letter, assume that the customer is going to pay, and that's going to be reflected in the tone of the letter, which is a great thing. So you should call the customer before sending this first letter. Now, one of the main purposes of this initial phone call is to make sure that your customer agrees that they owe you. So you don't want sending collection letters if the customer is disputing the amount that they owe you. So if they're not happy with the service or product you provided, then that's what you need to find out in that first phone call, and you need to then resolve that before continuing on into collection letters. Now, that doesn't mean the customer is always right, but you need to address their concerns best you can. You need to come to a conclusion that, well, they may not think they owe me, but they do owe me. I've addressed all of their concerns, and I feel they owe me money. Then you continue on to the collection process. But make sure you understand all of their concerns before doing that. Don't jump directly into the collection process. Call them, try to understand what's happening. You might also send them an email. So anytime you onboard a customer, I highly recommend find out how they like to communicate. Not everybody likes phone calls. In fact, a lot of people don't like phone calls anymore. So do they prefer email? Do they prefer text message? Find out how they like to communicate, and then you want to communicate with them in that method prior to sending this first collection letter. Again, establish whether they are happy with the product and service and whether they agree that they owe you. So things not to use. So obviously, again, we talked about professional language. Don't use harsh words. Don't harass the customers. Now this says don't send text messages. Now a text message might be sent instead of an email or a phone call. What this means is don't send text messages in lieu of a collection letter. They are not a replacement for a collection letter. Again, a collection letter has to be a professional business correspondence, because again, there's 2 purposes here. The first purpose is to get them to pay you, and hopefully that's what's going to happen. But if they don't pay you, you've established this line of correspondence that you can refer to in trying to collect the debt through court or other means. I don't ever recommend communicating with your clients through social media links. It's just kind of very unprofessional. I would keep the correspondence directly to them through, again, telephone, email, and texts. So let's talk about these 4 collection letters. The first letter is going to be sent after you contact them by email or telephone. Again, with this first contact with the telephone or email, you're establishing that, in fact, the debt does exist. This first letter has to be sent no later than 14 days after the date of the invoice. Now, this means that initial phone call has to be very quick, right? You need to give them time to respond to that initial phone call before sending the letter. So my recommendation is, as soon as that invoice goes late, a day or two late, get on the phone, talk to the customer, determine whether they're unhappy. Is that why they didn't pay? Are they unhappy? What can you do to make them happy? Or, if you deal with them and eventually it becomes they're just not going to be happy, but they owe you money, then you're going to go into the collection process. But stay on top of it. So I actually have some experience with this. I was a bookkeeper for a couple of years for a roofing company, and part of the job that I just really disliked was this whole collection process. But the main advice I would give you from that experience is stay on top of it. As soon as that invoice is late, you need to place a phone call, try to determine if something's wrong or if they just forgot to pay. Once that, give them 5 or 6 days to respond to that phone call with a payment. If that doesn't happen, then you need to get out this first letter. You need to get it out quickly, again, within 14 days of that date of invoice. So debt collection is such an unpleasant task that it's very easy to just let it fester, right? Don't wait 30 days before you make that first phone call. You've got to stay on top of it. Again, that is my best advice for collecting debts. Stay on top of it. Don't let the problem fester. Okay, the second letter. Before we send the second letter, I'd recommend a phone call again. Confirm they got that first letter. See what they're thinking. Why haven't you paid me? If they don't respond to that first letter, then you need to send the second letter. In that letter, I would document that this is the second letter. We've already sent you a first letter. Again, you're establishing kind of a paper trail that you can use in any collection process. Okay, if they haven't paid by the second letter, then we're going to have to send them a third letter. Again, I would try to reach them via telephone or maybe email first to touch base, see what's happening, why haven't they paid you. And if they don't respond to that second letter, then you're going to need to send this third letter. The third letter is getting a lot more serious. By the time you get to the third letter, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to get paid, at least easily, voluntarily. So the third letter is going to be a little bit more serious, and so you're going to need to send it certified mail. So now we need to not only kind of establish this paper trail, but we need to have proof, have evidence that they in fact did receive this third letter. And finally, the fourth letter. The fourth letter, you're probably not going to get paid at this point. So really, the fourth letter is to basically tell the customer what's going to happen if they don't pay. So before writing this fourth letter, you need to decide what you're going to do. Are you going to seek legal action in court? Now, with me, I worked for a roofing company, so we had the option of putting a lien on the property that we repaired. So that was a very nice option for us. And so a lot of times the fourth letter would just say, you haven't paid us, please do so, or we're going to place a lien on your property by this date. So again, be very specific. But we had that option, so that was very nice. If you're in a business where you can't place a lien on property, then you're going to have to look for other options. Say, if you don't pay us by this amount, we will be filing a claim in we'll be filing a case in small claims court, or we'll be turning it over to a debt collector, which could adversely affect your credit rating. So spell out exactly what's going to happen in this fourth letter. Obviously, you're going to have to be assertive, but again, professional. No personal attacks. Be very clear about what's going to happen if they don't pay you. Okay, so some of the options if they don't pay us. You can hire a collection agency. So with a collection agency, they're going to try to collect the debt for you. If they do collect the debt, they're going to charge you about 25% to 45% of that amount collected. So that is an option. Make sure if you do this, you no longer want this customer, right? Perhaps if it's a good customer and they've just disagreed with this particular bill for one reason or other, maybe it's not worth sacrificing the relationship with that customer, because when you go to a debt collection agency, you're sacrificing that customer. They're no longer a customer. And maybe that's fine. right? If this was a legitimate debt where they didn't even argue about the debt, they just didn't want to pay you, well then you don't really want them as a customer. But if it's a good customer and there's just this disagreement and they've never paid you, maybe you just want to consider writing it off without sacrificing that relationship with the customer. So hiring a collection agency, that certainly is a possibility. Another possibility is writing off the bad debt. It's the easiest thing to do. You won't waste time dealing with the collection agency. If it's a very small amount, this is probably what you should do. And then finally, if you do write off the debt, let's talk briefly about the tax deduction. So the tax deduction depends on your accounting method. So if you're an accrual basis taxpayer, that means you recognize revenue as soon as you send out that invoice. All right, not when the customer pays. So if you recognize revenue when you send out the invoice and it never gets paid, then you can claim a bad debt deduction to offset that revenue because you never got paid. However, if you're a cash basis taxpayer, you don't recognize revenue till the cash is received. So with a bad debt, you never received the cash, you never recorded revenue, so obviously you don't get an expense to offset that, right? You've never collected the cash, there's never been any revenue, there's nothing else to do. So that's the collection process. I hope this is helpful. I hope I was able to use my couple years of experience with the roofing company. Again, very uncomfortable task, unpleasant. Stay on top of it. Don't let it fester. That's my best advice for you. I'm Tim Yoder with Fit Small Business, and I hope this was helpful.